Good morning, second graders. Today is Monday, April 20th, and I have a story for you called A River Ran Wild. This week we are going to keep our focus to cause and effect, except for today. Today we are going to kick off the week with this book, and we're going to think about author's purpose. Now, we talked a lot about this at school. There are three different main categories of why an author would write a book, right? The first one is to persuade. Sometimes authors will write a book to try and get you to believe or do something. That's called persuasion. Sometimes books are to inform you, teach you new things, trying to give you new information or facts. And these are a lot of the books that we learn from. And then sometimes a book is purely just to entertain, right? Just to make you laugh, just to tell a story. A lot of times we will call these fiction stories, stories that just make us laugh and smile. And today, I want you to be thinking about those three authors' purposes. And that's going to be your response today. So you're going to be responding on a sheet of paper or in your notebook today about what you think the author's purpose of this book is and why. Okay, and then I'm also going to have you write what you think her message is. Lynn Cherry wrote this book, and it's considered an environmental history book. All this week we're going to be reading books about our Earth, and this one is a wonderful one to kick it off. It's about a woman's whose vision and actions helped change the future of a river. And this is a true story. This really did happen. And so I hope you enjoy it. And it's called A River Ran Wild. Long ago, a river ran through the land of towering forests. Bears, moose, and herds of deer, hawks, and owls all made their homes in the peaceful river valley. Geese paused on their long migration and rested on its banks. Beavers, turtles, and schools of fish swam in its clear waters. So we're talking about this river right here. One day, a group of native people searching for a place to settle came upon the river valley. From atop of the highest mountain, known today as Mount Massachusetts, they saw the river nestled in its valley, a silver sliver in the sun. They came down from the mountain, and at the river's edge they knelt to quench their thirst with its clean water. Pebbles shone up from the bottom. "Let us settle by this river," said the chief of the native people, and he named the river Nashaway, river with the pebbled bottom. Settling and making your village by a river is a good idea, right? That way they're able to get access to water. By the Nashaway, Chief Wiowa's people built a village. They gathered cattails from the riverbanks to thatch their dwellings, and in the forest they set fires to clear brush from the forest floor. In these clearings, they planted corn and squash for eating, and they made arrows for hunting and canoes for travel. When the Indians hunted in the forest or caught salmon in the river, they killed only what they needed for themselves, for food and clothing. They asked all the forest creatures that they killed to please forgive them. The Nashaway people saw a rhythm in their lives and in the seasons, and the river, land, and forest provided all they needed. The Nashaway had lived for generations by the clean, clear, flowing river, when one day a pale-skinned trader came with a boatload full of treasures. He brought shiny metal knives, colored beads and cooking kettles, mirrors, tools, and bolts of bright cloth. His wares seemed like magic, and the Nashaway welcomed him. They traded furs, and soon a trading post was built. In the many years that followed, the settlers' village and others like it grew, and the Nashaway became the Nashua. The settlers worked together to clear land by cutting down the forests, which they thought was full of danger, wilderness that they would conquer. They hunted wolves and beaver, killing much more than what they needed. Extra pelts were sent to England in return for goods and money. The settlers saw sawmills along the river, which the Nashua's current powered. They built dams to make the mill ponds that were used to store the water. They cut down the towering forest and they floated tree trunks down the river. The logs were cut up into lumber, which was used for building houses. So you could see, boys and girls, the land is really, really changing as the settlers come and build it, right? The settlers built fences for their pastures, they plowed fields and planted crops. They called the land their own and told the Indians not to trespass. Hunting land disappeared as the settlers cleared the forest. Indian fishing rights vanished as the settlers also claimed the river. The Indians' ways were disrupted and they began to fight the settlers. The wars raged for many years, but the Indians' bows and arrows were no match against gunpowder. And so the settlers' rifles drove the Indians from the land. Through 100 years of fighting, the Nashua was a healthy river, sometimes dammed for grist and sawmills, but still flowing wild and free. Muskrats, fish, and turtles still swam from bank to bank, and deer still came to drink from the river, and owls, raccoons, and beavers still fed there. At the start of the new century, so boys and girls, that would be 1900, we're talking now, over 100 years ago, an industrial revolution came to the Nashua's banks and waters. Many new machines were invented. Some spun thread from wool and cotton. Others wove the thread into cloth. Some machines turned wood to pulp, and others turned that pulp into paper. Leftover pulp and dye and fiber was dumped into the Nashua River, whose swiftly flowing current washed away the waste. So they were dumping the waste into this river. There were times of much excitement, times of progress and invention. Factories along the Nashua River made new things of new materials. Telephones and radios and other things were being made of plastic. Chemicals and plastic waste were also dumped into the river. Soon, the Nashua's fish and wildlife grew sick from this pollution. The paper mills continued to pollute the Nashua's waters. Every day for decades, pulp was dumped into the Nashua, and as the pulp clogged up the river, it began to run more slowly. This is still the river, boys and girls. It's a totally different color. As the pulp decomposed, bad smells welled up from the river. People who lived near the river smelled its stench and stayed far away from it. Each day as the mills dyed paper red, green, blue, and yellow, the Nashua ran whatever color paper was dyed. Soon, no fish lived in the river, no birds stopped on their migration, and no one could see the pebbles shining up through the murky water. The Nashua was dark and dirty. The Nashua was slowly dying. One night, Owiana, a descendant of the Wiowa Indians who still lived by the Nashua, had a dream so vivid that he woke up in wide-eyed wonder. In his dream, Chief Wiowa's spirit returned to the river and saw the way it was now, still and deadly. Chief Wiowa mourned for the Nashua, but where his tears fell upon the dirty waters, the waters were cleansed until the river once again flowed freely. The next morning, Owiana went to speak to his friend, Marion. Now, this is the important woman of the story. When he told his friend of his dream, she said, I had the same dream also. River with the pebbled bottom is the name Wioa gave it. But today, no pebbles shine up through the Nashua River's waters. So together, they decided something must be done. Marian traveled to each town along the Nashua, and she spoke about the river's history and her vision to restore it. No longer do we have a river. It's a stinking, smelly sewer, but it wasn't always this way. People listened to her and they imagined a sparkling river full of fish. They imagined pebbles shining up through the waters. So they started to sign petitions and sent letters. They protested to politicians and showed them jars of dirty water. They convinced the paper mills to build a plant to process that waste, and they persuaded the factories to stop dumping. Finally, new laws were passed and the factories stopped polluting. Slowly, the Nashua's current began to clean its water. Year by year, the river carried away the dyes and fibers to the ocean, and Marian and Oiana thanked the people who helped clean the Nashua. Through the meadows, towns, and cities, the Nashua once again began to flow freely. Paper pulp no longer clogs it, and chemicals no longer foul it. Now we walk along its banks and row upon its fragrant waters. We can set our boats upon it and with its current drift downstream. Once again, the river runs wild through a towering forest greenway. Red-tailed hawks and barred owls live here. Geese will pause here from their long migration and rest on the riverbanks. Deer once again come to drink its waters. And we too have settled by this river. Pebbles shine up through clear water, and Nashua is what we call it, river with the pebbled bottom. So boys and girls, this is a true story about a river a river that did almost die, right? And it was the vision and the hard work of Marian and her friend and all the people who agreed that something needs to be done. Now, boys and girls, since then, there has been laws that have passed. In 1965, which is about 85 years ago, there was U.S. Congress did pass the Clean Water Act. And factories can't dump in rivers like that anymore. But boys and girls, before there were laws like that, things like this were happening. So I want you to think today about, why did Lynn Cherry decide to write this book? Why does she feel like it's important for children and adults all over to hear this message? Why did she write this book? Was it to persuade? Was it to inform? Or was it to entertain? I want you to think about why you think she wrote this story. And then I want you to take it one step further. I want you to write down what you think she wants you to take away from it. What does she want you to learn from this? Okay, so that's your reading response today, second graders. The rest of this week, we're going to be reading other wonderful books about Earth and different things that we can do to all pitch in. Wednesday is Earth Day, so we're doing this series of books in honor of Earth Day. And so there is no perfect book to start our week than this one, A River Ran Wild, True Story of the Nashua River. Okay, so please work on your reading response right now of what you think the message was. And you might just see that again in your Google form too. So write it down and think about, what is it that Lynn Cherry really wants you to learn from this story. Okay, have a great learning day, second graders. Thank you for listening and happy Monday.